Hello, Brasil! SHRI MATAJI. Welcome to our Virata podcast. And today we have a very special presentation for you. So we are going to talk here about SHRI MATAJI in Brazil, the visits of our Holy Mother to the Vishuddhi, left Vishuddhi land. So first, I'll start telling a little bit the story of Brazil. And the first thing, if you don't know, my name is David. I forgot to present myself. And we are going to talk a little bit more. So, about the history of Brazil first. And everything starts with an island. It was actually a very mysterious island that, all the sailors, they would try to reach this place, but the island would move. It was a very mysterious and secret place called High Brazil. So a lot of old maps would show this little island in the Atlantic Ocean, and no one could reach it. No one could reach it. Because as soon as you would approach the island, it would move away from the ships. And what happens is the name Brazil comes from this island and also comes from the Brazilian wood that was later baptized as Brazil wood because, because of the name Brazil, and also because Brazil means also fire, or it means that this wood had like these properties, to bring this reddish color that would paint a lot of clothes in Europe, and also would be called Brazil. So there are these two origins of the name of Brazil, and these were very interesting times, very also difficult times for many people. And I just show here this image. This was the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Also the Ottoman Empire would call the conquest of Constantinople. But once the Constantinople was occupied by the Ottoman Empire, they started to charge taxes. They imposed some high taxes, so that the products coming from Asia, especially from India, couldn't reach Europe. So this is a very important moment, because then the Medici, especially the Medici in Venice, they started to finance the age that we call as the age of discovery. So Portuguese and Spanish, they start to basically take their ships and start to discover the world, to try to find the new road to reach India and Asia. And just to show you a little bit more of the power of these two countries, both Spain and Portugal, you can see that the map here is divided in two. So basically, Portugal and Spain, they come together in what they call like the Tordesillas Treaty. They come together with the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, and they divide the world in two parts. One part would be Spanish, and the other part would be Portuguese. And the Portuguese, they were really interested in India. So, in 1500, Brazil, it's finally discovered. You can call discovery or invaded, but basically, once they find that place, the Portuguese say, "You remember that island, this mysterious island called High Brazil? Well, I found it." So that's why it's called Brazil, and that's when the Portuguese arrive in the land. So, and it's important that they arrived in Salvador, and then we'll tell later. But then, so Brazil began. And here's a story actually of Axe. It's important, the story, because all these ships, they had a lot of it was very strict actually to be part of the of the crew of these ships. So it's almost like an army. People sometimes have the idea that was a little bit messy, but no, they were very strict in the ship. And if something went stolen, that would be a big deal. And one day, axe was stolen in the ship that was coming to Brazil. And then they accused one guy called Carvalho. And this guy said, no, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was someone else. But as punishment for stealing this axe, he was sent to Brazil to stay there in the land while the ship returned to Europe, and he would have to live with the indigenous. And so he did. And he actually, by punishment, he became the first Brazilian. So the first Brazilian is this Portuguese guy who lived with the indigenous. So there's a lot of the first, let's say, Brazilian people, Brazilian population, let's say, it was actually constituted by people who went to live there, that did some sort of, stole something, the ship, or was accused. That was the case of Carvalho, because actually he didn't steal, but he was accused and had to live there among the indigenous. So let's talk a little bit more about this original Brazilians, the indigenous people. Actually, they didn't call the place, not the land, Brazil. They call Pindorama. So it's a very funny name, but how they call the land. So we tend to say Brazil when the Portuguese arrived and named the place. But the original Brazilians, they were there for a very long time. And it's very interesting because they have a very deep connection with the god of thunder. They call Tupan. In Brazil, it's also a place where you have most like happenings of thunder and lightning. So it's also a place where they worship this goddess that's actually associated to Sri Vishnu Maya, like also the power of the left Vishuddhi. And what's interesting in that 100 years after the Portuguese arrived in Brazil and in the Americas, you can see that the indigenous population decreased by 80%. I mean, not only by the killings of the indigenous, unfortunately, but also the disease that the Europeans would bring to the Americas and would actually kill the indigenous because they weren't actually prepared to fight those diseases. Okay, one thing that's very important, it's also the products that they could be found in the Americas. No? For example, imagine like potato, tomato, and imagine this Europe, or the world without this product. It's interesting that potato, when was introduced in Europe, also actually stopped with hunger that happened in some of the populations here, and tomato became so popular. Can you imagine also Italian food without tomato? It's impossible to imagine. And one of the most important things as well was the precious stones. The precious stones that they found, what is called the El Dorado, so the land of gold, that many historians says that was even this gold and the precious stones that financed the Industrial Revolution in Europe as well. Okay, next step, it's also a very important part of Brazilian history, it's the African heritage. So after the discovery, Brazil stayed for a while now without much of importance for Portugal. But after they found some precious stones, and also they would bring the sugar cane, and then they start bringing the first Africans, and the first Africans arrived in the country. And this is actually a very sad part of the history of Brazil. Even SHRI MATAJI mentioned that slavery is the only karma of the country. The only karma of Brazil is the slavery. And this was the country also that brought most African slaves in, or the slaves in the history of humanity. And this is more than half of the slaves who came to the Americas. Okay, here's the quote where SHRI MATAJI says, the only calm of Brazil is slavery. So just to tell you how important. One thing that's important about African power, I think, is that most people don't talk much about this, but it's the power of the Vishuddhi. I think it's a very joyful, no, like aspect of our culture. Even most of Africans coming as slaved or enslaved people, I think the joy, this aspect of communication, the music, it's so strong. So at the same time that even from a tragedy, I think all Americans managed to turn this into some sort of joyous manifestation in our culture. So, and this was a time when the slaves, they came to work in sugar cane plantations. So the sugar, they say that's also like the one of the things that the Brazil happened to addict the world. So the production of sugar cane in Brazil that actually inspire also the sugar cane plantations that you later would have in the Caribbean. And it's very kind of a very strong connection with the African slavery in Brazil as well. So, okay, just to give you a kind of a more worldwide kind of perspective what was happening at that time. So Maria Teresa from Habsburg, from the Habsburg family, she started to rule in 1740, and SHRI MATAJI mentioned that she was the incarnation of Sri Rajalakshmi. And this is a very important, there's a very important connection to Brazil that later are explained. So what's important here is that to understand that the yellow of the Habsburg family, it's the main color, the yellow of Habsburg. That's also in the Schönbrunn, in the castle of Schönbrunn. That's very traditional in Austria. And at the same time, 1757, it's when William Blake is born. And you can see that just like 3 years later starts the Industrial Revolution. That in many ways it was actually the people coming from the fields. You consider the population in London almost more than doubles, and Sri William Blake is witnessing all that, and that's the factors that he also calls in the poem Jerusalem the dark satanic mills. And then in 1776, you have the American War of Independence. There's also a very important event that will have a repercussion in all the Americas. And later you have the French Revolution in 1799. So that's the era of revolutions that are taking place in both in Europe and in the Americas. And then, just to give an example here of a very important personality that was in the middle of of this revolution, it was Marie Antoinette, that was a daughter of Queen Maria Theresa of the Habsburg family in Austria. And this is actually a very sad thing because Marie Antoinette was killed by the French Revolution, and this was something that SHRI MATAJI was always very sad about, as she mentioned also that the French Revolution perhaps was necessary, but they didn't need to kill all the royals as well, and especially, her daughter, Maria Antoinette. Okay, and then we come to the Napoleon invasions. After French Revolution, although there is this chaos in the country, and also it's a perfect environment for the rise of a dictator like Napoleon. So Napoleon starts to conquer part of Europe, to invade some countries, and then what happens that at that time the Portuguese had lost, all the power that they had previously, as you remember, from ships. So they lost a lot of their, let's say, importance in the world arena, because especially because of industrial revolution. They didn't have like a quick industrial revolution. They were also more interested in selling the wine. And what happens is that the Portuguese king, he sees an opportunity basically to leave the country. And at that time, it wasn't really common, the kings to leave their country. It was actually impossible. Now, if you think about his plan A was actually to escape to Brazil. It was actually the most rich colony, and that's what he did. The English said, okay, you tell that you wait for Napoleon when he comes to Portugal, but actually what you do, you escape and we will give you the support, and you escape to Brazil. And that's what he did. And Napoleon, even in his diary, he wrote that the only person actually who managed to fool him was the King of Portugal, because he thought that the king would be waiting for him, but no, he escaped to Brazil. And this was, like something unheard of. It's not, we are not saying here the times where you have Prince Harry and Meghan. This is times where the king would never ever leave the capital to go to the colonies, especially the Americas. Okay, so then his son, the son of the King of Portugal, comes with him to Brazil, and he needs to get married because he's, like a young gentleman, a young handsome gentleman, and he has no wife. And then he actually asks any sort of princess available in Europe, and the Portuguese, they were still kind of very, very respected in Europe. And he managed to get married to a princess from the Habsburg dynasty. And that's the flag here you can see on the right hand side here, that this is the flag of the marriage of the Habsburg, the yellow of Habsburg, and the green of the family, the Portuguese family. And that's the flag that symbolizes this connection, and that what would be later the flag of Brazil, as you might guess. Okay, so then Brazil is celebrating in 1822, 200 years. I mean, in 2022, 200 years of independence, and this Habsburg princess that becomes the Empress of Brazil, it's a very important figure, is a very important character that's going to fight for the independence of the country. She had, she was very educated and helped in this process. And what's very important here is because, Brazil had this royal family living there. The King of Portugal at some point goes back to Portugal, but the prince stays, and Brazil, it's the only American country who has a royal family, a Brazilian royal family, that it's the connection of the Bragança of Portugal and the Habsburg from Austria. And this also, it's very meaningful because later it helps Brazil to remain united. As they call the Portuguese America, you have the Spanish America, as you can see here in Latin America. The Spanish America, when gains independence, it breaks down in different countries. It gets separated, so many, many countries here. And the Portuguese America stays united. So you can see in Latin America, the only country who speaks Portuguese is Brazil, and many other countries speak Spanish. Okay, so then the son of this marriage between the Habsburg and the Portuguese prince becomes the Brazilian emperor. And the Brazilian emperor, it's a very charismatic and popular character in the country. But at the same time, Brazil was facing a very dark moment in history, because Brazil had independence, but it didn't abolish the slavery, because all other American countries, the moment that gained independence, also finished and abolished slavery. But Brazil, no. Brazil kept on having slaves. And as you can see here in the image, there is also the coffee. That's also the second product that Brazil managed to make the world addicted. So coffee was like very, very, I mean, most important product Brazil was exporting, and the slaves, they were cultivating them. And there was a big dilemma, because a lot of people were becoming rich by selling this coffee. And these were actually the people who owned the slaves. So the emperor wanted to stop slavery, but who actually had the money to keep the country were these slave owners. So he wanted to stop, but they didn't want to stop. And that was the big dilemma. And that what happened is that in 1888, there is the end of slavery. But before Brazil and slavery, Brazil imports a lot of European immigrants, especially from Italy, because the wife of the emperor was an Italian princess. And at that time, they believed that, by bringing, Brazil was not a rich country, because I need to import a lot of white people. This was what science believed at that time. So there was a massive immigration of Italians, including my great-grandfather came at that time to Brazil. And that's how it all started, and especially this division, because the slaves, they were free, Africans were free, but they didn't have jobs, because the jobs were given by European migrants, unfortunately. And that's what happens in Brazil until today. We have people who live in the slums. They are mostly African descendants, and Brazil is one of the most unequal countries in the world. Okay, so then we are now jumping to 1923, and that's the birthday of SHRI MATAJI. So this very auspicious moment for the entire humanity. And then some very important events happen after that. The end of Second World War in 1945, and Indian independence in 1947. What's important here to say also that Brazil had a team, like soldiers fighting. Brazilian soldiers were also in the Second World War. Brazil for many years kept neutral in the war, but the Americans convinced Brazil to come. And you see the symbol here. It's the smoking snake, because there's this expression in Brazil, and a lot of people said Hitler would say that it's easier for a snake to smoke than Brazil to join the war. But yeah, so just to say that was impossible for Brazilians to join, but actually it happened and it joined. And one of the very interesting things about Brazil also shows this quality of the Vishuddha, that was also the only troop, the only squad in the Second World War that was mixed, so that white and blacks and browns, they would all be in the part of the same squad. Now other countries, most of countries, they had separate whites and blacks. They had different squads, and this shows also how this mixture of Brazil. I know that the generals at that time they didn't like it so much, but it was part, I think, of the Brazilian DNA, and you can see in this picture that they're all enjoying and playing like some samba and some songs, and enjoy pretty much like the company of each other. Okay, so also what's important in Brazil is that really a mix of people from different countries, and Brazil it's still kind of the biggest Japanese community outside of Japan. So many Japanese came to Brazil because at that time there was problem of hunger in Japan, and they saw this opportunity, and Brazil opened the doors. And one funny thing also about Brazil is that Brazilian passport, as Brazil, it's also pretty much a good in relations with different countries in the world. That's why Brazil it tends to be neutral in many occasions. So Brazil has access and it's visa free to many countries, including Europe. And most European countries include even like Russia or Turkey. That, for example, other passports, even some European passport, don't give access to. And it's interesting that the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong Un, no? He actually traveled Europe with a Brazilian passport because anyone can be Brazilian, anyone can look Brazilian. So he got the Brazilian passport and traveled all over Europe. Okay, so now we're in 1947, Cold War. So it starts after the Second World War, this Cold War, US and the Soviet Union. And what happens? It starts a dictatorship in Brazil in 1964. So Brazil, again, was neutral. And there was really a potential of Brazil becoming communist, because especially because of inequality. You know, a lot of people want for sure to have a better quality of life and not so much inequality. So the communist regime and model sounded very attractive, but the US didn't like. They didn't want to have another Cuba in the American continent. So they basically supported the dictatorship in Brazil to stop that. Okay, and then in 1960, Brazil's new capital. So Brazil creates a new capital called Brasilia. That until today, before it was Rio de Janeiro, and until today is Brasilia. And in 1985, there is the redemocratization of Brazil. And it's interesting because it's really, with the end of the Cold War, it wasn't important anymore to have that control in the country. And then in 1989, SHRI MATAJI comes to the country for the very first time, and then SHRI MATAJI visits the country for 3 times. So in total, 4 visits: 1989, 1992, 1994, and 1995. One thing that's very important and very meaningful is the first time when SHRI MATAJI arrives in Salvador. And there is a very nice story from Bruno, a Sahaja Yoga, Brazilian Sahaja Yogi. And it tells when SHRI MATAJI comes, no, she lands in the airplane. At that time, you have to walk. You go down the airplane via those stairs and walk on the ground. And when SHRI MATAJI stepped on the Brazilian soil for the first time, it was something amazing happens, something completely incredible happens, that SHRI MATAJI fell on the ground, and then she came back immediately. She jumped back immediately. And then when SHRI MATAJI was falling down, Bruno tried to stop her. But then SHRI MATAJI said, no, no. And for him, it was almost like in the film Matrix, no? The reality stopped, like its own speed, and it was in a completely different configuration. When Shri Mataji comes back, then the world starts to seem normal again. And then Shri Mataji told Bruno that this happened because when she touched the ground, a lot of the souls of the slaves and indigenous people came to ask her for liberation. That's why that happened, and that's why Shri Mataji touched the ground, because it was too much, too many souls came. And by telling the history, that many spirits must have been there asking Shri Mataji for liberation. Okay, Shri Mataji did in Brazil 2 pujas in 1989. She did a Shri Devi Puja, and in 1992, Shri Mahakali Puja. So this is a photo from Duilio, from Italian Sahaja Yogi Duilio, that one of also the pioneers of Sahaja Yoga in Brazil. And he took these 2 pictures. And in the first picture, you can see that Shri Mataji is looking straight to the camera, to Duilio. Now he's taking a picture. And then he notes he's taking many pictures, no? And the second picture, he notes that Shri Mataji looks to the sky. But he couldn't see anything there. But once he developed the film, he saw that there was a big light. No? So it's a miracle photo. So it doesn't know, but maybe an angel or a deity appeared before Shri Mataji, and that's what she saw, this light. There is also this photo of Shri Mataji's feet after the puja, and you can see that in the left Vishuddhi here, there is almost like kind of a injury or a small kind of friction in the nail. And Duilio was saying that possibly when Shri Mataji fell on the ground, and might have hurt a little bit her toe, and that's why you can see a little bit perhaps of blood here. And this perhaps Shri Mataji working the left Vishuddhi of Brazil and South America. Okay, Shri Mataji also did the string burning in Salvador. And Shri Mataji said that after the string burning, Brazilians didn't need to worry about black magic. And black magic was bought by Africans when they came. And Salvador is one of the cities that received most Africans in Brazil. And this is a place where still there's some black magic, and Shri Mataji was really working out that problem in the country. And after the string burning, she said that Brazilians didn't need to worry about that anymore. These are some photos, and this is Bruno, and this is the daughter of Duilio and Teresa. This is the first public program, first speech of Shri Mataji in public. You can see that a lot of people came, even people there on stage. They brought some stairs up the stage so that everyone could sit down there. And so people were really eager to listen to Shri Mataji. And this is just a map showing here how many cities Shri Mataji visit. You can see there are 4 cities here, and it's Brasilia, Salvador, Rio de Janeiro, and São Paulo. There is very interesting qualities to all these cities. Rio de Janeiro, it's the aspect of morality of the country, perhaps the muladhara of the country. São Paulo is the economic aspect, perhaps the Nabi. It's also like the let's say the most affluent city in Latin America as well. And Brasilia is the capital, also the Sahasrara of the country, the most spiritual city, let's say. And Shri Mataji really liked the vibrations of that part. Okay, this Shri Mataji comes to Rio de Janeiro, and there is this miracle photograph, and you can see that there's some light here surrounding Shri Mataji's body, and it forms the shape of South America. And there's a sequence now that's very nice of a very kind of powerful miracle photo, and it's a sequence. Shri Mataji is here with a Portuguese yogini called Maria Amélia, and she just landed in Rio, and she's going to enter that car. And you can see that there's almost like a hand coming to open the door to Shri Mataji. And here the hand is also there. And it's really very clear how this light appears here in the photograph. And then the door is closed and the light is also gone. And Shri Mataji said that there are two Swayambhus in Rio. One is the Shishiva Swayambhu, that's called the Sugar Loaf. It's a very famous landmark in Rio. And Shri Mataji also talked to the yogis, and she was drawing there, telling them that one of the interesting aspects of the left side is that these boots, they give you the desire to do bad things, and you feel the dopamine. You feel also this excitement of doing bad things, and somehow you enter in this vicious circle of wanting the dopamine, and you want to do bad things, and you enjoy doing bad things. So she was explaining that as well. And the other Swayambhu is Sri Ganesha Swayambhu, one of the seven wonders of the world is the Corcovado. It's where the statue of Christ is there as well. There's a nice story that's actually a French priest. He saw that mountain and he saw, no, we have to put a statue of Christ. You have to place that statue there. And the French gave this big statue as a gift to Brazil. And Shri Mataji points here to another mountain, and she says that there is a place in Rio, a mountain that has also negative energy, the energy of a demon, apparently Kumbhakarna, and she's pointing there to that mountain. And now a little bit about Brasilia. When Shri Mataji was in Brasilia, this is also one of the most powerful and wonderful experiences there. And Brasilia is all this modern city, because it was created in the 60s. And in 1992, Shri Mataji arrived at the airport. You can see that from 1989, I mean, there are not so many yogis, but in 1992, there were already many yogis there waiting for Shri Mataji at the airport. And one of the interesting things about Sahaja Yoga in Brazil is that the politicians, they were really open to listen to Shri Mataji. And apparently, one of the things that helped, that made Brazilians open, politicians in Brazil open, it was her connection, Shri Mataji's connection with Mahatma Gandhi. So it really opened the doors there. And this picture here, you can see when Shri Mataji meets the president of the Senate in Brasilia, and Shri Mataji gives the self-realization to all these politicians she meets. This is the Minister of Education. Shri Mataji is talking about the Sahaja School in Brazil, and she's even talking about land, and this minister is quite open, really likes this idea, and likes talking to Shri Mataji. And what also interesting is just to show a little bit also about this diversity in Brazil. For example, this minister has also German background. Also, Brazil has a lot of different immigrations: Polish, German, Czechs, and Swiss, many others. And this is the results, let's say, of all these immigrations. She also meets the finance minister. Shri Mataji tells about how to improve the economy of the country. The Minister of Justice, And Mataji gets the key of the city from the mayor of Brasilia, and this is also a very meaningful one. Of the things that are also very interesting is that all these politicians, they were waiting for SHRI MATAJI. SHRI MATAJI didn't need to wait for anyone, but the meetings was arranged in a way that the politicians would be waiting for SHRI MATAJI. And just to now give a kind of a quick overview how it's Sahaja Yoga in Brazil. So there's a puja, Shivaratri puja, that happens every year, international Shivaratri puja, that of course everyone who is watching this presentation is more than welcome to join, and the Brazilians are waiting for you with open arms. And this is in a very beautiful land in Brasilia, this spiritual land. And in terms of comfort, it's quite high standards. Many yogis who come from abroad, they are really impressed. So there are places where for women to sleep with beds and all the comfort possible. So they have this big tents also, and there is the pujas and the evening programs. There are also marriages. So the marriages, the engagements, they are done in Kabbalah or in India or I think in the US, I think. And they get married also. Marriages are taking place in Brazil as well. So there's an organic garden in this place. And one of the things also that's very powerful Brazil about talking about this Vishuddhi, left Vishuddhi power, that online meditation is quite powerful. Many yogis are coming from online meditation. For 10 years there's been like online meditation in Brazil, and so when the pandemic came, there was already like a good infrastructure and everything was working, so many Sahaja Yogis came to that. So, and I would just want to finish here with a nice showing a little bit this book that you just published. The link in the description, you can get this book. So the many stories that I was telling here about Brazil, they are in this book. This book, there are also yogis from different parts of the world, from Austria, from Italy, from India, from Japan. So this is an experience from different Sahaja Yogas of the world, and how the greatest incarnation of all time impact the lives of people around the world. And there are interviews, and these interviews, they were prepared with all the love possible for all of you to enjoy. And that's how I'm finishing this presentation. I hope you enjoyed. And what I wanted to tell you, that this book also, it's a great bridge, because many of these interviews, or some of these interviews, were with people who don't speak English. So it's also a great way to understand what happens in different parts of the world and connect with different yogis. So I would like just to thank you very much for your attention. And that was our Virata podcast with the special about Brazil, and hope you enjoyed very much. Jai SHRI MATAJI. Bye bye.